The sky had the color of tin, flat and cold above the frontier town of Dalemar, where debts were paid in silence and settled in skin. She stood behind the laundry line, hands soaked red from scrubbing ash into cloth, the wind lifting the corners of her apron like it meant to carry her somewhere else. But it never did. She was 19, though her back bowed like someone twice that. No name worth speaking. Folks just called her the labor girl, same way they said mule or bucket. Her father had traded her name away years ago for a bottle and a pair of dice. What was left was calloused fingers, split lips, and the memory of rain that once smelled like sugar. Today, the line snapped. Just a button's worth of a mistake, but when the apron dropped into the dirt, she knew something worse was coming. A crow had been following her since dawn, perched atop the smokehouse like it was waiting for a verdict. She didn't believe in omens, but she felt one breathing down her neck. By midday, her father came for her. He was wheezing, sweat clinging to the curls behind his ears, stinking of smoke and borrowed liquor. He didn't knock on the washhouse door, just leaned in and said through cracked teeth, "Put on something half-decent. You're comin' with me." She didn't ask why. In Dalemar, questions got you bruises. Obedience got you invisibility. She washed her hands in a basin of gray water, dried them on her apron, and let her hair fall loose. He didn't wait for her to finish tying her boots. Just walked ahead, down the path toward the old livestock ring where nobody sold cattle anymore, only promises and people. The townsfolk were already gathering. There were whispers, small and sharp. The banker's son. The saloon girl with green gloves. Old Mr. Cass, who hadn't spoken since the war but now stood like a statue beside the post. And across them all, benches had been dragged into a circle, creating a stage that smelled of horses and old decisions. At the center was a man with a book and a pocket watch. He didn't wear a judge's robes, but he held that kind of power. He smiled at her father and flipped a page. "Mr. Renlow," the man said, "the sum is 200. You've agreed to clear it with labor." Her father cleared his throat, spat into the dust, and nodded. "Good." The man turned to the crowd. "Anyone offering more than 6 months of service gets her outright. She's healthy, quiet, works fast, no known illnesses, stays in her place, as is." The words hung heavy. She kept her chin high, but her throat burned. Her knees threatened to fold, and her breath was shallow. The first bid came from a man she didn't know, 35 and slick-haired, with a missing front tooth and one long scar under his eye. He looked at her like she was firewood, dry, ready to burn. The second bid came from Mr. Cassidy, the butcher. No one asked why he needed help when his hands were always blood-soaked. The third was worse, a man in a coat too fine for the weather. He didn't bid with numbers. Just said, "I'll pay whatever ends the conversation." That man got the nod. Her father signed something he never read, then turned to her, eyes dry. "You be good," he said. "Don't shame the name I gave you." She wanted to scream, but shame had taught her stillness. The buyer reached for her wrist. He didn't touch her like she was a woman. He gripped her like he owned a shovel. Possession, cold and firm. His breath was sweet with chewing tobacco. She stumbled, and a voice cut through the stillness like a slow thunderclap. "That's my wife." The crowd froze. The auctioneer paused, pen still in hand. Even the birds went silent. From the back, in the shadow of the livery barn, a man stepped forward. His coat was worn. His boots were dust-scuffed. He didn't look rich. He didn't even look angry. But there was finality in his tone. Like he hadn't said something new, only reminded everyone of a fact they'd forgotten. The buyer blinked. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer him. He looked only at the girl. And for the first time in days, maybe months, she felt seen. He didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't size her up. He just said again, softer this time, "That's my wife." A ripple passed through the crowd like a breeze through cornstalks. The buyer's hand slipped from her wrist. "She's not wearing a ring," he barked. The man from the shadows pulled something from his coat pocket, a leather string, crude, but with a silver ring tied to the center. He tossed it through the air, and it landed in the dust between them. The girl stared down at it, heart pounding. "You just now remembered you're married?" the auctioneer asked, voice uneasy. The stranger's mouth twitched. "Didn't forget. Just got here late." The girl bent, picked up the ring. It was simple. Worn. The kind that had a story. She didn't understand. Not yet. But she slipped it on anyway. Because the truth was, she'd rather wear a stranger's mercy than a monster's ownership. The buyer cursed. "This is fraud." "No," the auctioneer muttered, eyes on the crowd. "It's drama. And it's over." The crowd dispersed, not out of justice, but out of discomfort. Towns like this didn't like unresolved tension. They liked everything in neat little boxes. Sold. Signed. Handled. As the man stepped forward, she noticed his face for the first time. Early 30s, maybe. A jaw with some stubble. Eyes like creek water after storm, clear but not gentle. He held out his hand like he wasn't offering help, just an invitation. She hesitated. He said nothing, and she took it. The sun broke through the clouds as they walked away. Just a sliver. Just enough to make the dust glow gold. Behind them, her father leaned against a post and lit a cigar with the last match he owned. Ahead of them, nothing was promised. But when he glanced sideways at her, and she at him, there was something in the quiet. Not romance. Not safety. But the beginning of a story neither of them had the words for yet. And in a town where she'd once been sold, she felt, for the first time, something unexpected. Unowned. They rode out of Dalemar before the church bell rang, before the dust from the auction settled, before anyone could stop the story from becoming truth. He didn't speak much as they left, and she didn't ask questions. There was something sacred in that silence. Not the kind that holds fear, but the kind that lets breath return to the body in small, cautious gulps. The mare he brought for her was old but steady, like it knew how to carry sorrow without asking its name. She clutched the reins with shaking fingers, ring on one hand, dirt still under the nails of the other. She could feel the town watching, even as it disappeared behind her, its whispers clawing at her back like thorns. But he never looked back. Not once. The trail wound north, through a dry pass lined with juniper and bones of fence posts long since abandoned. He led the way with a quiet confidence, not arrogant, not soft, just sure. Like he had done this before, led someone away from ruin. Like he knew what shadows followed people and how far behind they walked. By nightfall, they reached a slope above a ravine, and there, tucked beneath two ridges, was his land. A modest house with smoke rising from its crooked chimney. A red barn missing a door. A porch slumped like a man who'd worked too many winters. But it was still standing. That alone made it feel holy. She dismounted with care, boots hitting dry ground. He stepped up and took her saddlebag without a word. Then gestured toward the porch. "I'll bring water," he said, voice gravel low. She nodded. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she stepped onto the porch. A chipped rocking chair waited in one corner. The door stood open, like it had been waiting too. Inside, everything smelled of pine and rusted kettle iron. There was no decoration, no lace or scripture on the wall. Just a stone hearth, a table with one chair, and two cups turned upside down. The bed in the corner was neatly made. A spare quilt folded with military precision. Everything looked like it had been done by someone who needed order to outrun memory. He came in with the basin and set it down. Steam curled upward like breath from a tired mouth. "You can sleep here," he said, nodding toward the bed. "I'll take the floor." She looked at him then, really looked. He didn't remove his hat. Didn't smile. But his eyes were honest. Not kind. Just honest. "I can take the floor," she said. He shook his head once. Final. They ate bread and beans that night, sitting on opposite ends of the table. She watched him move, slow, economical, like every motion had been learned from hardship. He chewed like a man used to silence. After supper, he brought her a small lantern and a bar of soap wrapped in linen. "Wash if you want. Rain barrels still got some warmth left. She stood in the yard behind the house, under stars that blinked like old ghosts. The cold bit at her, but the soap smelled faintly of mint. She washed her hands, her arms, her face, scrubbed behind her ears until her skin burned clean, then looked at her reflection in the dark water. She almost didn't recognize herself. When she returned, the lantern was still burning on the table. He'd unrolled a bedroll by the hearth, his boots lined neatly beside it. He was already lying down, one arm across his chest, eyes closed. She stood there for a long time. "You didn't have to do it," she said softly. His eyes opened. "I know. Why did you?" A beat of silence. "And because you looked like you'd forgotten what being chosen felt like." She said nothing more, only climbed into the bed, pulled the quilt to her chin, and stared at the ceiling until sleep came slow and strange. Days passed like that. He rose before sunup, worked the fence lines, tended the horses, split wood with precision that bordered on reverence. She watched from the porch some mornings, a cup of weak coffee in her lap, the ring still on her finger like a question waiting for its answer. He never touched her, never asked for anything, just left a bowl out for her every meal, mended the curtain rods when one fell, and built a small step for her by the wash basin so she wouldn't have to strain. Each act quiet, thoughtful, unspoken. Still, she waited for the shift. The moment he'd drop the mask and become like all the others. But it didn't come. One morning, she found him carving something near the shed. She approached slowly, unsure whether she was interrupting. He looked up, didn't flinch, just held out the object in his hands. A little wooden bird, rough around the edges, but it had wings. She touched it, tentative. "I don't understand," she whispered. He shrugged. "Didn't make it for understanding." She carried it with her that night to bed, set it on the table beside the lamp, and stared at it until her heart ached. It was the first gift she'd ever been given that wasn't followed by hands or hunger. One afternoon, she stepped into the barn to find him cleaning an old rifle. Dust floated in the air like gold motes. She paused at the door, watching. "I used to want to be a teacher," she said, unprompted. He didn't startle, just set the gun aside and looked at her. "What stopped you?" "Life," she said simply. "Maybe it paused you," he replied. "Didn't stop you." She hadn't known how badly she needed to hear that. Her knees almost gave. That night, the wind picked up. A storm rolled in over the ridge, sharp with cold and old warnings. He paced the porch like a man expecting trouble. She joined him, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Someone'll come looking for me," she said. He nodded. "Let 'em. And if they bring law, then I'll speak the truth. Which is that I called you wife because no one else saw a woman. Only wait." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not the clothes or the beard or the strength in his shoulders, but the scar under his left eye, half hidden. The softness in his voice when he said wife. The way he never asked for hers. "You don't even know my name," she said. He didn't flinch. "You'll tell me when you're ready." She almost cried then, but instead, she whispered it. He repeated it, once, like a prayer. In the following days, the routine deepened. She stitched new curtains for the windows. He fixed the leak in the roof above her bed. She taught herself to read from an old Bible in the corner. He left folded pages of poetry under her cup. They never spoke about what they were, only what they did. But the silence grew thinner. And then one morning, she woke to find a rider approaching the ranch. Not a neighbor, not a friend. A man in a black coat, face half-shadowed, familiar gait. Her heart turned to stone. She watched from the window as the man dismounted. He didn't smile, just walked with slow confidence toward the porch. The stranger stepped out to meet him. They exchanged no greetings. "I'm looking for a girl," the rider said. "Name doesn't matter. I bought her. She ran off with something that wasn't hers." The stranger didn't move. She's not here. I saw her. At the auction. That's the one. I want what's mine. No one here belongs to you. I've got paper, the rider snarled. I've got ground, the stranger replied, and a shovel if you want to test it. A beat of silence. The rider's hand twitched near his coat. But he didn't draw. Didn't dare. Because the man standing on the porch didn't bluff. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood like the wind didn't move him, like he belonged to something deeper than fear. The rider spat. You're gonna regret this. Doubt it. The man left. The girl was still frozen at the window, breath held like glass in her chest. The stranger turned. Looked at her. No smile. Just a slow, quiet nod. As if to say, I see you. Still yours to leave. But no longer alone. And that night, when he handed her the tin cup, there was a small chain inside it. And on the chain, the ring she wore, polished, warm from his hand. She didn't say anything, just placed it back on her finger. And for the first time, it felt like hers. The thaw came slow that year, as if winter refused to release its grip entirely, leaving behind patches of ice under eaves and cold breath in the mornings. The girl, who now kept her own name in the quiet shelter of her chest, rose before the frost had finished lifting from the garden rose. She was no longer startled by the groan of floorboards, no longer waited for shouting or instructions. He had never once told her what to do. Instead, he left space. She filled it, bit by bit. By the third week of spring, she had stitched new curtains from feed sacks, planted sweet corn, and scrubbed the walls until her fingertips cracked. Not because he asked it, but because she needed the doing. Needed to know her hands could build something instead of just survive it. She didn't sleep with the lantern on anymore. He was always near but never hovering. He slept by the hearth unless it stormed loud enough to rattle the windows. Then he'd sit awake, boots on, a rifle across his lap, watching the door like he owed something to her safety. She asked him one night, her voice barely louder than the wind, why he hadn't taken the bed for himself. He looked at her, eyes unreadable in the firelight. I didn't bring you here to have you. I brought you here so someone couldn't. That answer stayed in her bones. The townspeople whispered, she knew. They'd seen her once or twice in town beside him, her hair braided now, her chin a little higher. There was a way people stared when they thought you owed them a scandal, as if your existence had interrupted their peace. A woman at the mercantile leaned across the counter once and said, too sweetly, "You're the girl from the auction, aren't you?" She didn't flinch. I'm the woman who walked away from it. The woman blinked, then smiled too tight, but said no more. At home, the stranger, no, not a stranger now, not to her, sanded down an old bench and placed it beneath the window facing east. He didn't say why, but she knew. It was where she liked to watch the sun. He carved her initials into the side. Not loud, not fancy, just there. A mark that said, you were here. You mattered. She wept when she saw it, but not from sadness, from recognition. There came a day when a neighbor brought news. A rider had returned to Dalemar. The same man in the black coat, now carrying documents and threats. He claimed the girl as property, declared her absence as theft, and waved papers like swords. The stranger didn't speak for a long time after hearing it. Just sat on the porch, sharpening his knife slowly, eyes focused on something distant. She stood in the doorway, watching. You don't have to fight for me. He didn't look up. I'm not fighting for you. She flinched. Then he added quietly, I'm standing beside you. The next morning, she packed a bundle, folded her few belongings, left the house with a purpose in her step. He found her saddling the mare alone. You leaving? He asked. She nodded. Only for a day. His brow furrowed. You don't owe anyone anything. I know. Then why go? She looked at him then, chin high, eyes firm. Because I'm not hiding. He said nothing for a moment, then gave a single nod and handed her his hat. Take this. Why? So they look at your face, not your fear. She took it. It smelled like firewood and saddle oil. The ride to Dalemar felt shorter this time. Maybe because she wasn't being led. Maybe because she was returning as someone remade. The streets were loud with spring clamor, wagons clattering, children shouting, boots hitting wood. But everything quieted when she stepped into the square. The man in the black coat stood in front of the sheriff's office, arms slung lazily across his hip. He saw her and smiled with teeth that didn't reach his eyes. "Well now," he drawled. "She returns." She didn't answer. He stepped forward, brandishing a folded paper. "Signed and sealed. You're mine. You vanished. But this here, this makes it law." She looked to the sheriff, a man who'd once refused to intervene. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The man took another step. "You want to make this easy, girl, or—" "I have a name," she said. The words cut sharper than a blade. He froze. "What?" She stepped closer, voice steady. "I have a name. I was never yours. And this," she gestured to the paper, "isn't worth the ink it's smeared with. You bought a lie. You paid a drunk to give you something he never owned." He growled. "You're just a—" "No," she said. "I'm not." The townsfolk were watching. The same ones who'd seen her led like livestock. Now they saw her standing, wind catching her braid, stranger's hat on her head. The man moved to grab her wrist. But a rifle cocked somewhere behind her. And a voice said, calm as dusk, "Touch her and lose the hand." The crowd parted. He was there. The man who once called her wife without knowing her name. Now standing with the truth in his eyes. The sheriff finally stepped forward. "That paper's void. She never signed anything. No marriage. No consent. You've got no claim." The black-coated man sneered. "You're siding with her now?" "I'm siding with the law," the sheriff said. But the girl knew better. This wasn't about law. It was about someone finally looking and seeing a person instead of a payment. She turned to the man who'd followed her. "You shouldn't have come. I said I'd stand beside you. You always do." She smiled, a small, tired thing. And they rode home. That night, she lit the fire herself, made bread, set the table, placed the wooden bird in the center. When he entered, boots scuffed from the road, she pointed to the seat across from her. "Sit," she said. He did. She cut the bread in half, passed him a plate. He stared at her hand for a moment, the same one that once trembled at the sound of boots. Now steady. "I want to say something," he murmured. "Then say it. I don't want you to stay because you owe me. I don't. I don't want you to stay because you're safer here." "I'm not." He paused. "Then why are you still here?" She looked at him for a long time. Because no one ever asked her before. And that was the answer. "You're the first place I ever chose," she whispered. The fire popped. The wind hummed at the windows. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small box. Pine wood. No carvings. Just raw and honest. He slid it across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Whatever you make of it." She opened it. Inside, nothing. Not a ring. Not a letter. Just space. Room. Voice. She closed the box, placed it gently beside the bird, and met his eyes. "Then I'll put my name in it." He smiled then. Not wide, but full. And when the storm came that night, she didn't flinch. She slept soundly, lantern off, breath easy. Because the world might still call her by what she was sold as. But she knew better now. She had something no man had ever offered her before. A name no one gave her, only one she chose to keep. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ground in silence before the autumn leaves had finished their fall. It came without warning, soft and pale, muting the world until every footstep felt like a confession. She woke to it layered on the windowsill, breath fogging the glass as she traced the frost with a fingertip. The rancher was already outside, clearing a path through the drifts with a shovel and slow resolve. Inside, the fire cracked steady and warm, and the little pine wood box still sat unopened on the table, waiting. Not for an answer, but for a moment. That day, she baked bread with cinnamon and butter, filling the house with the kind of scent that made memories swell uninvited. She found herself humming. Not a song she knew, just a sound that seemed to come from some tender place inside her finally thawing. By dusk, the stranger returned from the barn with snow in his beard and a letter in his hand. He didn't speak as he handed it to her, just placed it gently beside her tea, his eyes unreadable. She turned the envelope over, fingers hesitant. No return name, just ink stained with weather. She opened it. Inside, a single sheet, creased at the corners. From the sheriff. A man is coming. The one who tried to buy her. He has papers again. New ones. He's been asking questions in nearby towns, whispering accusations. That she stole. That she seduced. That she belongs to him. He's due in Dalemar in 2 days. She read it twice, then folded the letter and placed it in the fire. He watched it burn without asking what it said. But later, as they stood beside each other in the hallway, she said, softly, "I want to go back." His hands curled slightly. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not going to prove something." He looked at her then. "I'm going to end it." Dalemar hadn't changed. Same leaning church steeple, same worn storefronts, same faces aging without reflection. But this time she didn't enter through the back alley. She rode through the front, her coat dusted with snow, boots silent on the hard-packed ground. They didn't recognize her at first. That was the strange mercy of transformation. She was no longer ash-stained or hunched or led by anyone's leash. Her hair was braided down her back, her eyes level, her mouth calm. The ring was still on her finger, and now, around her neck, the little wooden bird, its wings sanded smooth from her thumb. She went straight to the saloon. Voices quieted. Men looked up from their drinks, eyes squinting through the haze of tobacco. The one who once claimed her stood near the stove, papers in one hand, whiskey in the other. He was speaking too loudly, spinning a story about law and loss and ownership. Laughter clung to him, but it was nervous laughter, thin and brittle. She stepped into the room like someone walking across a stage she'd already burned down once before. He turned, saw her, smirked. "Well, look what the snow blew in," he said. "Thought you'd gotten lost up in them hills, sweetheart. You forget who you belong to." "No," she said. "I just remembered who I was." The room stilled. She took another step. Her voice didn't rise, but the quiet around her did. "You wave papers and lies, call it law. But I was never yours. I never said yes. You bought an agreement from a man who never had the right to sell it." He barked a laugh. "The law says." "The law changes." She pulled another paper from her coat. Real paper. Signed by a judge in a neighboring county. A declaration of her freedom. A declaration of invalid sale. A declaration of personhood. She'd spent the last month gathering it. Quietly. Patiently. Like a woman collecting kindling before a storm. He stepped forward, teeth bared. "You think that changes what folks know about you? You think that makes you clean?" "I don't need to be clean," she said. "Just whole." He reached out as if to snatch the paper, but a hand closed around his wrist before he could touch her. The stranger stood there now. Quiet. Still. But no part of him was uncertain. "Try it," he said low. The man looked into his eyes. And whatever he saw there made him shrink back. The sheriff stepped in from the door, spurs clicking. "I heard enough," he muttered. "That paper's real. And this saloon's no court." He turned to the man with the whiskey. "You bring this again, I'll lock you for harassment. You breathe her name in a lie, I'll see your tongue dry up in your mouth." The man looked around the room. No one stood for him. No one met his eyes. He was alone, and he knew it. She turned then, not to flee, but to finish. This town watched me fall once, she said. No one spoke. No one stopped it. That's not shame on me. That's shame on you. She walked out. And for once, no one followed. They returned home that night without saying much. The air was soft with flurries, and the sky hung low with pale stars. He helped her down from the saddle, hands brushing hers for just a second too long. Inside, the fire had burned low, but it welcomed them like an old friend. She sat at the table and opened the pinewood box. Inside it, she placed the folded declaration. Beside it, she laid her carved bird. Then, gently, she placed her name, written for the first time on a slip of clean cloth. Not embroidered, just inked, honest and simple. She closed the lid. He watched her. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, and they stood, facing each other in the hush of firelight. He didn't kneel, didn't offer flowers or vows, just held her hands in both of his, like she was something already sacred. "Then we speak it," he said. And they did. No church, no preacher, no permission, just two voices in the quiet. One saying yes, the other saying always. The next morning, the town would speak again, as towns always do. They would say she made a man of him, or that he rescued her, or that neither ever really belonged. But the truth is simpler. What the crowd never knew is that this wasn't about rescue. It was about recognition. She had not been saved. She had been seen. And that made all the difference. Because when a woman writes her name for the first time in a place no one thought she belonged, she changes the map for every girl who comes after. And that, darling, is how legacies begin. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.